tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make this Petal Starburst block. So this is a hand stitched EPP block using two shapes. And this video goes along with the free pattern download as far as launching my new Accuquilt die. And it is this geometric shape. I had this die manufactured probably a year or so ago, because this is an EPP shape that I really like, and I was tired of cutting out this shape with an acrylic template and a ruler. So I had this manufactured for my personal use, and I actually pitched it to Accuquilt, and they decided they would carry it to be a companion that really complemented the 1-inch EPP Go Cube. So English paper piecing Go Cube set, in which you can make 4 other shapes. This will go with that. So this is a 1-inch, we're calling it the jewel petal. And you can get 4 jewel petal cuts out of 1 piece of fabric that goes across here. It's actually a 6 by 6 inch square. And you can also cut your papers, or for me, I actually use leave-in stabilizer that I cut here. And I'll have the links for you below on that video to show you how you can make your own leave-in so that you don't have to take out the papers. So in celebration of launching my new die of this new shape well, it's not a new shape. This is part of the public domain as far as a geometric shape, but it's now part of the die to try for October 2023 of Accuquilt. So I'm a huge Accuquilt fan. I really love using their dies, especially for English paper piecing. So I will put the links below for you to learn more about this die, the jewel petal, as well as the 1-inch EPP Go Cube, which you will get the hexie in that. So I'm using 2 dies for this particular block. So it's the jewel petal and then also the hexie. Now this is 3 that you can get out of 1 pass through with a 5-inch square, 5-inch by 5-inch square. And this comes out of your EPP Go Cube set. I'll have the link for you below in case you don't have that and want to buy this. You also could use, they have another one that actually has more cuts that you can get through when you pass through one of their other hexie dies. But for this particular pattern, those are the 2 dies that you will need to be able to cut your fabrics. So at this part of the pattern, you have the written pattern as far as the fabric requirements and your cutting instructions on how to cut your fabrics with the Accuquilt die. And so instead of graphics for you in that written pattern, I am a visual learner, and I know many other people are, especially if you're new to English paper piecing. So in this video, now that you've cut your fabrics, you've got them all ready to go, now it's time to learn how you actually hand stitch this block. Now there are 18 of these in the Petal Starburst pattern that I've made for you. And so what will happen is you will be appliquing all 18 of these to a background square. So you've got a background square here that's a 12-inch square, and then you'll be actually rotating. You'll see on your layout in the pattern there will be one of these, and then you'll have a blank 12-inch block here, and then you'll have another petal star, and you'll just keep rotating. So you'll look at your layout and the pattern to see how that works. Now, if you want, you could actually place these anywhere you want on those 12-inch squares of background fabric and make your own layout. It's very versatile. Or if you want, for example, when I show you how to stitch this together, I'm going to use the one from this video to make a pillow. So I will be appliquing mine to a pillow that will actually match this quilt. So now that you've seen what this is and what the video is about, we're going to get started, and I'm going to show you how to hand stitch one of these blocks. And then that way you'll have all 18 of them done, and you'll be ready to machine stitch them down to your 12-inch squares and then put your quilt top together. So let's get started. So in your pattern, I've given you a supply list of the supplies that you'll need. to hand stitch this together. Now, if you've never done English paper piecing, I do have a few other videos for beginner EPP, and I'll link those in the show notes for you below. But here are the items that we will need to be able to stitch this block. So again, as I mentioned, you'll want to have your jewel petal die. You'll also want to have your 1 inch, these are both 1 inches, hexie die as well. These are the 2 dies that you will use. And within that, you also have the option to be able to cut your own papers. You can use your own cardstock, or as for me, I actually use leave-in stabilizer. And I'll link for you below how I make those using this cutout here. And that is the same for the hexie. So the 1 inch dies that come with your EPP Go Cube have 2. There's companions. One's for the fabric and one is for your papers. So it's up to you whether you cut your own papers or if you purchase them. Some people just like to purchase them. I do have the papers available on my website for purchase. They're actually iron-ons. So if you don't want to cut your papers, that's another option for you. So you'll want to go ahead and cut those according to the instructions that I've mentioned for you. So I have my fabrics cut here for our tutorial today. I've got my hexies, which you need 6 hexies. And then for your jewel petals, you'll need a total of 12. In the pattern, I've listed that of using all one fabric for your jewel petals here. But if you want to do scrappy and just be able to do a bunch, I've also listed for you how many individually of these you'll need from your scraps. So I've just got scraps here, and I actually have fussy cut these. So I'm actually going to use these 2 and alternate them. Here's an example of what we'll start with. This is the very center of your Petal Starburst block. So this is what we'll start with making first here. But it's up to you. Scrappy, all the same color, you can alternate them. But for the sake of the pattern, to make it simple, I have put that all 12 of your petal stars are from 1 piece of yardage of fabric, and then same for your hexies. So again, if you want to make it scrappy, I've listed for you the total number that you need. So you'll need that. You'll also need a needle. I like to use the Sue Daily number 11 milliner's needle. They're long enough and it's slightly flexible too to where it doesn't hurt my fingers with squeezing them too tightly. I also, you'll need probably a needle minder. I personally like to use Wonderfeel thread. You can either use the 80 weight cottonized polyester, or you can use 60 weight cotton thread. It's called Afina. I sell both of these in my shop. So this is what the thread line looks like. So this is my curated special thread that I am actually releasing this month. And I've got some neutral colors here for you that work with really kind of any color of fabric, and then some fun bold colors too for fall or, you know, any other season that works with your fabric. So I have that. I also have, this is Deco Bob thread. This is your 80 weight. So the other is your 60 weight. This is your 80 weight. And it comes in what's called the bobbinator. I'll put the links for you below on how this works, but it's a fabulous option for you to be able to use up your bobbins on your sewing machine, because this turns into a spool. But also for EPP, I love it because you can travel with 3 different colors of thread to do your handwork. And these are little compartments here. So I'll link the video for you to show you, but here are some options of my favorite threads, the 80 weight or the 60 weight. I'm actually going to be using the 80 weight Deco Bob thread, which is what is in here. And I have a spool of that. So that's what I'm going to use today. It just, your threads, your stitches don't show up as much when you use 60 or 80 weight. When you use 50 weight, you can see them more. So that's why I suggest that. I also have thread gloss. This is optional, but thread gloss can be really handy to help with any tangles in your thread when stitching. You'll also need your glue stick. I like sew line glue sticks, so I use those. A pair of snips. And then also I love the coral dots. So these are sew tight magnets that I use to be able to hold your pieces together when you stitch. If you don't have one of these, I do sell them on my website. If you don't have them, you also can use a clover clip. They work well also, but sew tots, I'm a huge fan. And then you'll need your papers. So for me, as I mentioned, I have cut leave-in firm stabilizer. I'll link that for you below on what I get. A huge roll of it. It's like 25 yards of it that I personally use. It's thick enough that you can still fold your fabric over it, but it's thin enough you're able to leave it in when you wash your quilt. You don't even know that it's there. So you've cut your 12 jewel petal papers, either out of cardstock, or you can use leave-in, or like I mentioned, you can purchase the iron-on from my website. And then also you've now got your 6 leave-in papers for your hexies. So those are the items that you'll need to be able to make this block. So let's get started with step 1 of the stitching of the inside part of the Petal Starburst block. So if you're new to English paper piecing, I'm going to go ahead and show you how you would put your papers in your fabric for one of these, the hexie, and then also the jewel petal. And then I'll let you do those on your own after I show you how to do one. So you're going to take, and I'll zoom in for you here. You're going to take, there we go, make sure you can see that. Your fabric, and for me, it's a solid, so it doesn't matter what side, but the pretty side is going to be facing down. And I like to put a dot of glue in the center. Actually, since I have a hole in these, we're going to put it up a little bit. And you'll just put your paper right there in the middle, okay? And then what you're going to do is you're going to take your glue stick and you're going to put glue all along the edge there, and then fold it over. Now, when you fold it over, you're folding it taut, not tight. That means you're not pulling it over really hard, because you want to be able to, when you stitch, that needle to really not go in the paper, if at all possible. But the nice thing about the leave-in stabilizer is that you can't even tell it's there. So sometimes my needle goes in the paper and that's okay. But again, just fold that over enough where it's a nice straight line, but it's not extremely tight. You'll just continue to do that all the way around the edge and fold over to be able to make your hexie. And for the last one here, I like to go from the left to the middle and then from the right to the middle so that it doesn't unstick the fabric that's already there. So I'll do that on both sides and then fold that over and press. Okay? So there you go. You have your hexies ready to go. So you can go ahead and actually do your other 5 of these the same way. Now let me show you how to do the same for your jewel petal. So pretty side down right here, and you'll take your paper. You'll do the exact same thing. I put a dab of glue there in the middle to hold my paper down. Line it up to make sure you've got the same amount of fabric on all sides. Press that down. And you'll do the same thing. You'll take your glue stick, put some glue on it, and you see the firm stabilizer is still strong enough to get a nice straight line when you fold this fabric over. That's why I really like it. So you can't use a real fine stabilizer, but this thick one does. And again, I'll link that for you so you can see which one that I use. And then you're going clockwise. So you see what I've done? I've just gone clockwise all the way around. Now for this one, you're gonna have a tail, and that's normal. We'll see what to do, or what I do with those when we stitch our pieces together. And same for this end here. I'll start from the left and go in, and then from the right and go in, and then you'll fold that over like that. And then you have your jewel petal, and you do have this tail. So again, when you do this, you're gonna go clockwise all the way around. And you're going to do that every time you do these. Always go in the same direction. That will help you when it comes to stitching all of these together. So go ahead, if you've not already done so, and put your papers, glue your papers into all of these pieces to be able to make the one block. And I'll show you how to stitch it together. Okay, so now that we have put our papers in all of your hexie fabric and your jewel petals, I'm going to show you how we actually are going to stitch this together. So depending on if you've chosen a scrappy version or if, like in the pattern, you've made all your jewel petal fabrics the same, then this is what we are going for. Okay, so if you've chosen all of yours to be the same, of course this isn't stitched together, and these little tails will tuck under, so you're not going to see them, but we're going to be going for this. So again, this is what we're going for our center to start out. So it's up to you if you make it scrappy, if you do 3 in one or 3 in the other, but the pattern does show you how to do it all in one color of fabric for your jewel petals. So there's that. Or for me, I think I'm actually going to alternate these really pretty roses in mine. And if you're wondering about this fabric, this collection was designed by my friend Melanie of Southern Charm Quilts, and it's called Cinnamon Tea. Took me just a second there to remember what it was. Cinnamon Tea. So let's get these together here. So this is going to look like this when we stitch it together. And I'll put my other ones aside that we'll need later. So that's what that's going to look like there. Okay. So what you're going to do is you're going to look at, depending on your layout, I know that I'm going to want to sew this one to this one. Now notice how these little tails right here will nest. If you've glued them all counterclockwise, all the tails are going to be facing to the left, and that's really what you want, because then that way it's going to tuck behind. Do you see that there in the back? That way it's going to tuck back behind there. So what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and thread your needle. And so I'm going to be using, like I mentioned, this 80 weight Deco Bob thread. And I like to, let me zoom out. I like to just pull it out and measure to about right here on my arm. I just pull it out about elbow's length. And that's about the length I use to try to avoid tangles. Now, as I mentioned, you can use thread gloss. This is a great gloss by Ponderosa, and she has different blends, so it smells, there's different smells for it. And of course, I'm Southern, so I chose the Southern blend. You don't have to use thread gloss, but I have found that it is helpful with avoiding tangles. So I just put my finger on it, run it through a few times, and then I'm good to go. You just make sure you shut the lid so it doesn't dry out. Okay, so everyone has a different way of threading their needle, and you do what works for you. For me, let me get it up here. I'll just feed mine through right there. And then I tie a knot at the top. And I actually go ahead and tie it one more time. Get it there into the camera. So it doesn't come undone. Every so often it will, if I don't have 2 knots in it. So I've knotted it there. And then for me, some people do a quilter's knot. I just loop it through, pull it down where I want it, and I've got my knot. But you do what works for you, okay? So I've got this threaded. Now I'm gonna take my 2 jewel petals and I'm gonna face them right sides together like this. Now you're gonna have your little tail in the way. You're just gonna kind of bend him over like this. We actually will be hiding those when we're all said and done, and it's gonna be bent over anyway. So I just kind of fold that over there a little bit like that, you can see. And I use my coral dot. So with the coral dot, this is the Sew Tight magnets, and that the color is coral. I think that's why they call it that. And it keeps your pieces in place so they don't move. So you're just gonna wanna get that lined up where it's flush really well. And you'll take your needle here. And you're gonna start down here at the end. Now again, move that little tail out of the way so that you can get right here, the very end. And you'll just sew through or pull your needle through once till you get to that knot, and then make a knot. So I go again, same spot, pull it through, and then I'm gonna put my needle through the loop to make a knot at the end, okay? So you're starting off with a knot here at your end so it doesn't come unthreaded. Some people do two. I tend to just do the one because ultimately all of this is gonna be quilted over if you're turning this into a quilt. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna come down, you see that there, about 1 thread length. Let me make sure those are flush. 1 thread length down. And this is a whip stitch. So you'll pull that through. And sometimes you have to kind of, when you first get started on this end, the little tails will kind of get in your way, so that thread there kind of got in the way. And again, a whip stitch. Now, as far as the distance between stitches, that's your preference. I tend to go about a 1/16 of an inch. And again, you're just gonna keep, you see where I've got that there? You can see that? You're just gonna keep doing whip stitches all the way down until you get to the very end down here. So go ahead and continue to stitch your first 2 together. I'm gonna stitch mine as well, about a 1/16 of an inch apart. And you'll be able to see when we open this up that with this 80 weight thread, it's practically invisible, especially since I picked the neutral color there that you can't see. So again, about 1 to 2 thread lengths down. If you happen to go through your paper or your leave-in stabilizer, not a big deal. You just may have to pull a little bit more when it comes time to take your papers out if you used regular paper. If you used leave-in stabilizer, you don't have to do a thing. So go ahead and stitch all the way to the end, and when you get down here to the end, make sure you tie a knot, tie it off, tie a knot. I actually usually do 2 down here at the end, just like we did here at this end, and you tied a knot. Go all the way down, whip stitch all the way down about 1/16 of an inch apart, and tie 2 knots down here at the end. And then I'll show you how to put the next petal on this little unit we've started right here. Okay, so we have stitched all along here. We've double knotted it at the end. Let's take a peek. Look at that. You see how the stitches just barely show up by using a neutral thread? So it can be really helpful to have several different colors. I know for me, putting it in the Deco Bob, depending on what color fabrics I'm using, can be really, really handy. And that's also why I selected some neutral colors here for you also. These are just some of my favorite colors. So I chose this as a curated color palette. Okay, so there we go. We've got the first 2 units together. Now I'm gonna look at, okay, what's next? It's this rose. And so that is gonna go right here. Now, if you wanted, you could choose this one and go right here. If you wanna do that, you can. They're gonna nest though. Either direction that you go, your tails are gonna nest back behind here. You see how that works? So make sure that you've glued them down clockwise. Okay, so we're gonna take this, I'm gonna move it over, again, right sides together, and get that lined up really well on both ends. Okay, I'm happy with that. I'm gonna fold that little tail back for stitching purposes. I'm gonna use my Sew Tight coral dot and make sure it's flush. Kind of wiggle it maybe a little bit to make sure you get that lined up there. And then we're gonna do the exact same thing that we did before. We're gonna take our needle and we're gonna get down here at the very, very end. Put my glasses on. Like that. And we're gonna come through and we're gonna tie a knot. Just like we did last time. Oops, I didn't tie a knot in the end of my thread. So we're gonna make this work for the sake of time. Pull that through. Go through the end there. So this is what happens when you don't tie a knot. So we'll go ahead and do that. I know some people don't. They're able to make it work without tying one. Not me. You see what just happened there? It wanted to keep pulling through, so go ahead and tie a knot. Okay. So you'll come down here at the end. Pull that through the loop. And you've got you a knot there. And then you're going to continue to stitch all the way down just like we did. So it is a 1/16. Let me get the focus there. About a 1/16 of an inch between stitches. Some people may do a little more. Some people may do a little less. That's just what I like, but you do what works for you. And again, you're going to whip stitch the whole way down. You take your needle down about 1 to 2 thread lengths in there, and you're just going to keep stitching, whip stitching all the way down. And it's a really, really relaxing. I like to do this when I'm camping or if I'm traveling. I take it with me on the airplane or in the car. So if you've never done English paper piecing, it is a great on-the-go way to get your quilty fix and to use up fabric scraps. Now see, sometimes that thread will get caught around that tail. So you do have to be a little careful with those little tails is the only thing, is keeping those kind of pulled back like that. So go ahead, continue to stitch all the way down to the end and double knot it. Okay, so now you've sewn 3 of these together. This is the top part of your little inner flower here, okay? So now you're gonna do the same thing in a second unit. And the reason for this is because when we get this second unit sewn together, which is gonna look like this, then we're able to fold this over on top of this and stitch one long stitch all the way across the center to connect these 2 units. It makes it much easier than trying to continue to sew on one at a time because of the little tails behind here. So for each of these centers, you're making 1 unit of 3 and then another unit of 3. And then once you've done those 2, we'll come back and I'll show you how do you flip this over, and you'll just stitch down the center. It's very simple there. Okay, now we have our 2 units sewn together. And this is really the easiest way to do this because now you're just going to fold one over on top of the other and do one long stitch here. So that's exactly what I do. Right sides together, and you've got all these little tails back here. It's okay, we'll be folding those over. Try to line up your edges as best you can. They may not be perfect depending on how well you folded over, but you'll want to line them up there and then double check here in the middle and make sure you've lined up your center here, okay? So that all of those points meet up. So I've got mine flush. I'm really happy with that. So I'm gonna use my coral dot and I'm gonna hold those together like so to be able to stitch. Now again, I keep my fingers just keeping those tails pulled back like this. That way I'm able, and I'll move the coral dot down just a little bit. That way when I'm stitching, I keep those tails out of the way when I'm going across this little bit of bulk right here. There's a little bit of bulk right there when you go through it. So again, try to get that lined up and flush as best as you can. As you're stitching, if you notice things move a little bit, it's always good to stop, just kind of double check, make sure it's lined up, stitch some more, double check, because you can fudge it just a little bit if you need to. So go ahead, take your needle, you'll double knot it right here, and you'll whip stitch all the way down to the end and then double knot it here. And then what we will have is we will have the center of our petal starburst. And then we'll start talking about, and I'll show you how we're going to attach the hexies. So go ahead and get to stitching, and I'll see you back here. Okay, so now you've got the center of your petal starburst block, and now it's time to start adding the hexies. And so this is where these are going to go. They're going to just kind of nestle right in here in the corners, as you can see. So I'm just going to kind of lay these here for you. Let me zoom out. Those will lay here like this. Now again, you could do scrappy. I've chosen to do solids on mine. And then you're going to be able to see, I'll just show you where these are going to go. These are actually going to be upside down. And I'm going to alternate mine like this. So you kind of get an idea for what this is going to look like when you're all finished. Isn't that fun? Okay, so let's take those out, just so you'll know. And what you're going to do with your hexie is same thing. Let me zoom in here. You're going to go right sides together. So you see how that fits perfectly, that geometric shape fits right in there. You're going to go right sides together this direction, okay? So you're going like this, right sides together this way. And the reason for that is because you're going to start here, double knot, or you can do a single knot, it's up to you. I usually do a double knot on the very edges. You'll stitch down to here, and I knot it here, and then when you flip it open, and this one side is stitched, you're going to be able to actually fold it over and stitch the other side here as well. So let me show you. We'll go ahead and flip that over there. I'll take my coral dot, sew type magnet, get that on there, and you want to make sure they're flush. So you might have to wiggle it just a little bit. That's what I'm going to have to do. Make sure it's flush there like this. And then you'll take your thread, which I did not knot again. Put a knot down there at the end. And this is where you'll just want to make sure you pay attention that you're always starting here. You're going to the center. We'll stop, open it up, and fold it over and stitch to here, okay? So line those up really well. Go ahead and do your knot here at the end. And again, it's up to you, but I do double knot the very ends of mine rather than just one single just to secure it. And then you're going to do the same thing that you've done this whole time. You're going to whip stitch about 1/16 of an inch apart between stitches as you go down. And you'll do that all the way until you get here to that little seam. Okay, so we've now stitched all the way down here to this seam. So you're going to take off your magnet, or if you're using a clover clip. And so you see we open this up here like this. You see that? So now we're going to be able to fold this over. Now, if you've used papers in the back, you're going to have to use a little bit more pressure to fold over. because your paper's going to bend back here. That's another reason I love leave-in stabilizer, is because it's flexible. And of course, you don't have to remove the papers. So we're going to fold this over. You see that loose where they're folded over this way, like that. Get it lined up the best that you can. I'm going to use my Sew Tight magnet here. Get it flush. And then remember, I've already tied an extra knot down here at the end at that seam. So I'm just going to continue to whip stitch 1/16 of an inch apart, about 1 to 2 lengths, thread lengths down. And then just whip stitch that all the way to the end. And when you get down here to the end, you're going to double knot it. Okay, so we've got our first hexie sewn on. And so now you're going to do the same thing. You're going to go over to this section right here. Don't be confused and start sewing it on here, because that's where your other jewel petal is going to go for step 3. So make sure you skip this and you go right into the one where there's the little nook on the sides. You see the little nook there all the way around? And so we're going to do the exact same thing. You're going to turn it slightly and you're going to look at where that is. Okay, remember, right sides together. So you're going to lay right sides together on top there and use your magnet or your clover clip. Get that secure and lined up. You'll do your double knot here, whip stitch all the way down to the center. Take this off, and then you'll fold just like we did this one to where you can stitch this side here. Okay? So go ahead and stitch all the rest of your hexies into each of those little nooks that I showed you here, skipping in between here because that's where your last set of jewel petals are going to go. So I'm going to go stitch mine all the way around, and then we'll come back and we'll do the last step. Okay, I now have my second one sewn on, and hopefully you will as well. And then again, we're going to skip this one. Put your hexie right in that little nook right there. So remember, fold over. And I will say, be real careful, because if you, for some reason, fold this over like this and set this down and maybe leave and come back and get distracted, there have been times I've accidentally started sewing right there. And what that means is I've actually sewn to one of the petals. So you don't want to do that. So just make sure you remember when you turn it that you're starting to stitch here and you go this way and then back up that way, so that you don't accidentally put one of your hexies here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stitch my last 4 all the way around here, and then we'll come back and I'll show you how to put the petals on. One of the things that I want to show you here on the back, after we've done our center, right, this one, if you flip it over, you can see how those little tails nest. They actually make a little star. So that's how it will look whenever you've glued clockwise, the way I've showed you. When you flip them over, I go ahead and press these down so that they lay flat. So that's something that I did want to show you on the back side of this, how those nest into a star, and then give it a good press to keep those down. Okay, so now we have sewn on all 6 of our hexie shapes, and it's time for really the last step with the stitching of the individual blocks. So now you've got 6 jewel petals left that you've cut. And so for me, I chose to do 2 different fabrics. But for you, you may have just done one if you're following the pattern exactly. And I'm going to alternate mine. So I'm going to be doing every other, like this, to where it's the opposite of this one here. So you just decide what works best for you. So let's talk about how we're going to stitch these on. Again, we're going to kind of follow the same scenario that we did before, where it's going to be right sides together. So you're going to make sure you know the order and the specific prints that you want where you want them. And you're gonna lay it here like this, and then you're gonna fold it right sides together on this first edge, okay? This first edge right here, right sides together, and line up your seams there the best that you can. Get my needle out of the way here. And then I'm going to use my Sew Tights Coral Dot, as I have this whole time, to help keep things in place. And then you're gonna wanna line this up again like we've been doing the whole time, the best that you can. You're going to take your needle, and we're gonna do the exact same thing that we've done before. We're gonna tie a double knot here in the end. Since this is the very edge of the block, I feel like it kind of reinforces it a little bit better to do two. And then you're going to do your normal whip stitch. So you'll come down here, let's see if you can see that, just like before, about 2 thread lengths down and about a 1/16 of an inch apart between stitches here. And I usually just kind of keep my fingernail, my thumb right there. So even the Sew Tight, you know, it's holding it down, but I also keep my 2 fingers, this forefinger and then my thumb there, to keep those flush. And then I just continue to stitch all the way down. And so that's what you'll do. Go ahead and stitch all the way down here to the seam. Once we get to the seam, we're gonna open this up and then we're gonna fold it back, and I'll show you how we're gonna stitch right here. Okay, so that first edge right there has been stitched. So I'm gonna take off my magnet here, and you can open it up and you see that is stitched down. So now you're going to fold this towards you, right sides together. So again, I'm using firm stabilizers, so these bend pretty easily. However, if you're using papers, it's gonna be a little bit thicker. You're still fine. You'll go ahead and just bend that right over. And of course, this right here is gonna bend over. That's fine because we'll be pressing this block when we're all finished. So I'm gonna line that up there, flush. I'll take my Sew Tight magnet, hold it in place. And because I haven't cut my thread from that previous seam there, I'm able just to pick up where I left off. So I'll sew there, go ahead and I'll just do 1 knot there on that end, since it's not really on the edge of the block. And then just continue doing your whip stitch all the way down until you get to this seam. And then we're gonna do the same thing with opening it up and then flipping it around and putting right sides together. So go ahead and stitch all the way here to this seam. Okay, now we've stitched all the way to this seam, so we're going to open it up just like we've done, and notice I've still got my thread attached. The needle's still here, we don't have to cut it. And we're gonna open that up like this. And then we're gonna turn it and we're gonna fold right sides together. So again, your papers are gonna fold. And we're gonna line that up to where your edges are flush there like that, so we can get a good stitch across. And then I'm gonna use my Sew Tight, and I'm gonna pick up right here and start stitching. And I'm gonna go ahead and do that single knot right there at the edge to secure that, and then whip stitch all the way down and then double knot it here at the end. And after you've done that, you're gonna continue to do that with all of the rest of your jewel petals, all the way around the entire block, and then we will actually be finished stitching it. And then I'm gonna give you a few tips about the block afterwards and appliquing this down to your 12-inch squares. So let's go ahead and attach all the rest of these, doing it this way exactly how I showed you. Okay, now we have sewed our entire petal star block, and you're going to make 18 of these for this particular pattern. Now you're always welcome, of course, to make more, and you could fill up your entire quilt with these rather than every other. You could fill up your whole quilt and just make a lot of these. So I think this one's really pretty. Now, from here, a couple things I want to show you as far as what to do next. So if you used papers in here, you're going to want to pull out those papers. And to do that, you'll just lift up on one end and kind of loosen that paper and start pulling those out. Now remember, if you accidentally stitched into the paper a little bit in some of these areas, you're gonna have to tug a little bit. I don't love removing paper, so that's why I use leave-in stabilizer. So I'm not gonna have to remove any of these. And you can see how flexible it is when this is appliqued down to your 12.5-inch square. It's got plenty of movement to it still. And when you wash this, these turn into basically like tissue paper. You don't even know that they're there. Okay, so I wanted to mention that to you. You'll want to take your papers out now. Now, after you've taken your papers out, or if you've used leave-in stabilizer, you've got these little tails here, right, like this. You don't want to cut them off, because if you cut them off, you're going to have open, exposed fabric here. So I'm going to show you what I do. I'm going to zoom in and let you see how I hide mine. Now, if you have some other way that you know of, feel free in the comments to let me know of how you hide these, but I'm gonna show you how I do it that seems to work pretty well for me. It involves using your glue pen again, and what I do is I put some glue on the tail, on the back side of the tail here. You can see that there. I'll lift it up for you. And a pretty good amount there. And then I fold it over to where it makes a diamond shape. Can you see that there? Let me zoom in for you. It makes a diamond shape. And you'll have to just kind of make sure you get it even there. And then it hides, you see when you look here from the front, you've hidden those tails. And so that's what I do with all of these. I just go ahead and put some glue. Again, pretty good amount of glue there on the tail. And then I fold it over where it forms this diamond shape. So the edges line up along the edge there pretty much. Every so often there might be a little bit that hangs over, and you might kind of have to maneuver that slightly. I might have to add a little more glue right there and cut any loose threads that may be there. But you can see how that hides that there. So you'll go ahead and cover all of those tails, hide all of those tails by using your glue pen and folding those back like that. Now, the other thing I want to mention to you is I did give this a good press. So when I came back, I pressed all of these really nicely in the front and also the back. You can see how all of the tails nested in the middle really well. I've pressed this really well. Now, if you've removed papers, then what's happened is some of these have gotten to be what I call whomper-jawed. They're a little bit distorted. And so you'll really have to give it a good starch and press for all these to lay back flat. I don't have to do that with the leave-in stabilizer, so I love that it saves me that step. So go ahead and glue all your tails down, and then we'll talk about some tips on appliquing this to your 12.5-inch blocks. Okay, so now it's time to applique your Petal Starburst blocks to your 12.5-inch squares. So I want to show you how to find the center so that you can have these appliqued on here evenly. Now, I machine applique mine down, so I do them on the sewing machine. And but you could hand applique these if you wanted. So what I like to do is I fold the square in half twice. So you're going to fold it here. And what I like to do is I use, this is a seam presser, and this is from Modern American Vintage. He makes some really beautiful quilting tools. They're heirloom quality, so these are things that will last for a long time and could even be passed down to loved ones. I'll of course put the link below for all the things that I'm using. So I just do that so I don't even have to take it to my pressing station. Press that down, and what we're trying to do is find the center of your block here, of your square here. So you can see there's the center, and then you've got your 4 ends there. And so what you're gonna do, I'll give that one more little press so we can see it. I can see it really well, but on the camera, I'm not sure if you can see that really well since it's so light. So we'll give that another press. Okay, so we open it up here, And what you're gonna do is you're gonna line up. Do you see how all the folds are part of a point? So you're gonna line those up the best you can. So you've got the hexies lined up here with that. And then you've got your points lined up here. So that lets you know you've got even space here and here. So this gives you plenty of room when you stitch this to another 12.5-inch square, which that's blank. So the one next to each side of this is just going to be your blank one if you're following the pattern layout. But you could always make twice as many of these and have one on each 12.5-inch square. You'll just need to kind of alter your fabric requirements quite a bit. So I lay this on here like this, make sure, and I know that's in the center. And then I take a pin and let's see, I'm gonna use one of my long ones here. These are really great. These are magic pins and these don't burn, they're silicone. So if you iron over it, you don't have a problem. And I like to put 2 pins in. I put one on that side and then I take it, turn it, kind of lift it up, and then I'll pin on this side as well. So that's nice and held down for me when I take this to my sewing machine to stitch it down. So what you're gonna do for appliquing this down, stitching it down, is you're gonna wanna pick a thread that blends well with the edge of your fabric. Now I've got 2 colors here, I got 2 going on. So I'm gonna have to decide between, you know, a really light colored thread or maybe a darker thread or something in between. So you'll wanna make that decision. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna take this to your sewing machine, and I'll zoom in a little bit. And what you're gonna wanna do is stitch along the edge here, all along the edge. I stitch about 1/8 of an inch away. You'll stop at the point, pivot, you'll go down, pivot again, here, pivot, here, pivot, and you'll do that the entire way around your block here, all the way. You also could use invisible thread if you wanted, or if you're appliquing, you know, you'll probably want to use something that you can't see very well either. I love using my 80 weight thread. So this is the Deco Bob. This is Wonderfill. And these are colors here that I picked that work really well. There's a silver, it's dove gray. There's like a kind of a taupe. Also have a peach, kind of a gold peach, and then a light color, a cream color. Because these are colors I work with often, and so many other people do as well. So I like using the 80 weight because it's really thin, but it's a cottonized poly, so it's extremely strong. And I love to use that because it's real thin and you can't see it hardly at all on the edge. Now, if you wanted to use a thicker thread, you could. If you want to make some fancy stitches there, you could even use a blanket stitch all the way around where it you know, your stitch goes here and then off the side and all the way around. Just however you want to stitch these down to your 12.5-inch blocks. Do what makes you happy. Do what works for you, but that is how I do mine. So what you're gonna do is you're just gonna go ahead and you'll take 18 of your 12.5-inch background fabric squares and your 18 jewel petal or your jewel starburst blocks, and you're going to applique them down. And then you're going to have, of course, as I mentioned in the pattern, you're going to have extras of these. And so what you'll do is after you've got all these together, then you'll take your other, this one's not cut, but you'll take your other 12.5-inch square here, set it next to it, right sides together, and then of course you'll stitch down and you'll make your rows. So you're gonna have all your rows that you'll have done, and then you'll stitch those rows together just like you would with a normal quilt top that you make. So this pattern is written so for someone with a basic understanding of how the Accuquilt dies work, as well as you've made, you know, 3 or 4 quilt tops, so you understand the process of making that. If you've never quilted before and you have come across this, I'll put a link for you below to one of my friends who has a beginner quilting class online, and you can take one of her beginner quilting classes and learn the basics of being able to quilt. So that is how you make this one. And I think for this particular one, I'm actually going to turn this to a small throw pillow to be able to have that to put in my studio or maybe somewhere in my house. And I think what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to quilt mine. I'll put some batting behind it and probably use my Baby Lock Sashiko, which replicates a hand stitch. And I'm probably going to do some kind of fun design with that. But that is your tutorial on how to make the Petal Starburst block and how you will assemble it, as well as how you will applique it down to your 12.5-inch blocks. So I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. This kind of shows you, again, you can see here's another really pretty one. I have all 18 of mine. Let me zoom out here for you. I have all of mine. There we go. Appliqued to my quilts, and I'll put the video here for you so you can see the pan out of the entire one. But my friend Mindy, she does a lot of custom. So in the negative space, you can see here of my quilts, she did a lot of beautiful quilting, custom free motion quilting in these other 12.5-inch squares that are in the negative space here. She actually did some really great quilting with that. So I created this with some negative space so you could do some beautiful quilting, either edge to edge or custom, or even if you want and you want to double up and make more of the applique blocks, you could applique those and have twice as many and make up a beautiful quilt. This is a great way to use up your scraps if you want. Again, the pattern tells you how many you need for your scraps, and then also for yardage. I'm Belle from Seam Sew Me, and I really hope that you enjoy using the new Accuquilt jewel petal die. Again, so thrilled to be collaborating with Accuquilt on this die that I knew just had to be part of the other dies in which you make EPP shapes. So I'm a huge lover of English paper piecing, and I hope you are too. And if you've never done it before, also in the pattern there are some links for some of my beginner tutorials on English paper piecing. So until next time, quilty friends, feel free to give a subscribe or a like so that you see more of my tutorials and videos. And until next time, make lovely things.